Hey guys, tonight we slip into the misty streets of a quiet 17th century Dutch village, where the air smells faintly of peat fires and freshly baked rye bread. You can almost hear the creak of wooden shoes on the worn cobblestones as you step cautiously beneath the flickering glow of an oil lantern. This is no bustling port city, with merchants shouting prices for exotic spices. This is a small, tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone else's business. And trust me, they really do know everything. You probably wouldn't survive a single week here without someone reporting that you took an extra loaf of bread or gossiped too loudly about your neighbor's suspiciously fat goose. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing how far our little storytelling family stretches around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you make your way through the narrow lanes, you start to notice how quiet everything feels, like the village itself is holding its breath. Wooden shutters are drawn tight, though a few narrow windows glow faintly with candlelight. The people here have strict rhythms, dawn bells for work, evening bells for prayer, and, well, other bells for entirely less pleasant reasons. We'll get to those later. Tonight, the village is a little restless, because earlier today, the bailiff made an announcement in the square. A punishment would be carried out at sunrise, one of those peculiar, old-fashioned ceremonies that everyone pretends they don't enjoy watching, but somehow never miss. It's like the 17th century version of binge-watching a scandalous reality show, only without the commercials. The square itself is the heart of the village. Imagine a cluster of thatched-roof cottages leaning into one another like gossiping neighbors, a small church with a crooked steeple, and a bustling market by day. Right now, though, it's deserted except for a strange wooden structure you notice near the center, the stocks. They're empty tonight, their heavy oak beams gleaming faintly under the moonlight. Tomorrow, they won't be so empty. This village might seem peaceful at first glance, but it runs on a very delicate balance of rules and rituals. Everyone has their role: farmers, bakers, weavers, fishermen, and everyone is expected to uphold the harmony of the group. When someone steps out of line, the entire community takes notice. That's where these punishments come in. They're not about brute force or secret dungeons like in some dramatic medieval tale. No, these are public, visible reminders designed to humiliate the wrongdoer and restore balance, like pressing a reset button on the social order. One well-known punishment here involves being locked in the stocks for several hours, while neighbors stroll past and whisper pointedly about your crimes. And believe me, Dutch villagers could whisper with the precision of a finely tuned harpsichord. Historians still argue whether these punishments were truly effective or just elaborate performances. But in a world without mass media, a public spectacle like this was the closest thing to a cautionary tale everyone could see for themselves. As you wander closer to the church, you notice a small bell tower beside it. Its bell isn't for marking time or calling people to prayer. No. This one rings only when someone has been caught doing something particularly shameful. The sound cuts through the stillness of the village like a blade, summoning everyone to watch the punishment unfold. Imagine the dread you'd feel, lying in bed at night, hearing that bell toll, and wondering who would face disgrace at sunrise. Beyond the square, a narrow canal winds its way past tidy gardens and fishing boats, bobbing gently in the moonlight. The water reflects the stars, and you think about how easily whispers could travel across this still surface. In a village like this, even the water seems to listen. As you stand there soaking in the atmosphere, you can almost picture the villagers from earlier in the day. Housewives with baskets of turnips, fishermen hauling nets heavy with herring, children chasing each other between the stalls, their laughter cutting through the clamor. Life here is simple, yet every action is part of a carefully choreographed dance of expectations. Break that rhythm, and you'll find yourself at the mercy of peculiar punishments that range from mildly embarrassing to downright baffling. One quirky detail about this place: they believe punishment should fit the personality of the crime. So while one person might be fined for selling watered-down ale, another might be forced to parade through the village wearing a ridiculous hat shaped like a fish. It's equal parts justice and comedy, though not so funny if you're the one wearing the fish hat. You pause, listening to the wind rustle through the thatch above you, and wonder how many generations have lived and died under these same rules. The punishments may seem strange to us now, but to them, they were the glue holding their world together. And as dawn creeps closer, you sense the village stirring, ready for another performance of this ancient ritual theater. The mist grows thicker, curling around the stalks like pale fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, an ordinary sound on an extraordinary morning. Soon, the bell will toll, and the peculiar punishments of this Dutch village will come to life once more. The morning arrives with a damp chill that seeps into your bones as you step into the square. The mist has lifted slightly, revealing clusters of villagers gathered in small, whispering groups. Their breath fogs the air, mixing with the steam rising from mugs of barley coffee and spiced ale clutched in cold hands. The mood is both somber and electric, the way a crowd might gather for a festival but without the music or laughter. At the center of it all stands the object of everyone's attention: the stocks. Up close, they look more menacing than they did under moonlight. Two heavy wooden beams, darkened with age and use, form a sort of crude frame with three oval openings, two for wrists and one for a neck. A small platform keeps the offender slightly elevated, like an unwanted actor on a very unflattering stage. The stocks are simplicity itself, and perhaps that's why they were so effective. Historians still argue whether they were primarily about punishment or about creating a shared village memory, a story everyone could tell and retell. In a world before newspapers or public records, the sight of your neighbor locked in the stocks was, in itself, the headline news of the day. Today's unfortunate participant is a young man named Peter, who reportedly watered down his father's beer before selling it at the last market. In a culture where beer wasn't just a beverage, but a vital part of daily life, a safer alternative to sometimes unclean water, tampering with it was a serious offense. Peter stands silently as the bailiff announces his crime. He looks pale, his eyes darting nervously between the villagers. His mother stands near the back, wringing her hands, while a group of fishermen whisper animatedly to each other, no doubt comparing this scandal to the time someone tried to pass off spoiled fish as fresh. The Dutch, it seems, had a long tradition of culinary controversies. When Peter is finally placed in the stocks, the crowd exhales as if a collective sigh has been released. The wooden beams drop into place with a heavy thunk, and suddenly, Peter is no longer just a villager. He's a living lesson in morality. Children peer up at him wide-eyed, while older folks shake their heads in disapproval. Public punishments like this weren't merely about shaming the individual. They were also a kind of community theater. There were no tickets to buy, but everyone was expected to attend, to witness, and to remember. The act of watching reinforced the rules as much as the act of punishing. It's a bit like how today people obsessively follow courtroom dramas on TV. The difference here is that you didn't just watch from a distance. You stood in the mud, heard the sobs, and maybe even smelled the unfortunate consequences if the punished person had been left there too long. As Peter stands trapped, a town crier reads a short proclamation describing his misdeeds. It's read aloud twice, once in the formal Dutch of the church and once in the plain, local dialect, so that even the smallest child understands exactly what went wrong. The reading ends with a traditional closing line: "Let this be a lesson to all." The villagers murmur their approval, and someone tosses a stale crust of bread at Peter's feet. It's symbolic rather than cruel, a reminder that those who upset the balance of the community don't get the same bounty as those who play by the rules. You notice something odd about the setup. The stocks are positioned so that Peter faces east, directly into the rising sun. As the light grows brighter, it becomes almost impossible for him to avoid squinting. Historians still debate whether this was intentional, a subtle way to add discomfort without lifting a hand, or just a coincidence of town planning. Either way, it has the effect of making Peter's humiliation literally glaringly obvious. Behind you, a group of teenagers snicker as they recount a tale of a previous punishment. Apparently, a tailor once found himself in the stocks for cheating a wealthy client by sewing pockets so shallow that coins would fall right through them. The irony wasn't lost on the crowd. The tailor who couldn't make proper pockets now couldn't move his arms to reach his own. The ceremony drags on for hours. Villagers come and go, some bringing baskets of vegetables to the market stalls nearby, others pausing to whisper comments or, in rare cases, to offer quiet words of sympathy. Peter's mother slips him a cup of water when the bailiff isn't looking. The crowd pretends not to notice, as if showing a tiny kindness doesn't break the spell of justice. And yet, there's an underlying humor to it all. At one point, a goose escapes from a nearby pen and waddles straight past Peter, honking loudly. The villagers laugh, some joking that even the animals come to witness justice being served. As the day wears on, you begin to sense the deeper purpose behind the ritual. It isn't just about Peter or his watered-down beer. It's about creating a shared experience, something everyone will talk about tonight over their dinners of salted fish and rye bread. Tomorrow, when they rise to milk the cows or mend fishing nets, they'll carry the memory of this morning with them. Toward mid-afternoon, the bailiff returns, striking the stocks with a ceremonial staff. Peter is released, his neck and wrists red and sore. He bows his head, murmuring an apology so soft you almost miss it. The crowd disperses slowly, like mist burned away by the sun, leaving only the empty stocks behind. As you watch the villagers retreat to their homes, you realize that while Peter's punishment has ended, its impact has only just begun. For weeks, maybe months, his name will be whispered in doorways and over fences, becoming part of the living history of this small Dutch village. You glance back at the square one last time. The stocks stand silently, waiting for the next story, the next lesson, the next reminder that in this world, justice is as public as it is peculiar. The morning arrives with a damp chill that seeps into your bones as you step into the square. The mist has lifted slightly, revealing clusters of villagers gathered in small, whispering groups. Their breath fogs the air, mixing with the steam rising from mugs of barley coffee and spiced ale clutched in cold hands. The mood is both somber and electric, the way a crowd might gather for a festival but without the music or laughter. At the center of it all stands the object of everyone's attention, the stocks. Up close, they look more menacing than they did under moonlight. Two heavy wooden beams, darkened with age and use, form a sort of crude frame with three oval openings, two for wrists and one for a neck. A small platform keeps the offender slightly elevated, like an unwanted actor on a very unflattering stage. The stocks are simplicity itself, and perhaps that's why they were so effective. Historians still argue whether they were primarily about punishment or about creating a shared village memory, a story everyone could tell and retell. In a world before newspapers or public records, the sight of your neighbor locked in the stocks was, in itself, the headline news of the day. Today's unfortunate participant is a young man named Peter, who reportedly watered down his father's beer before selling it at the last market. In a culture where beer wasn't just a beverage, but a vital part of daily life, a safer alternative to sometimes unclean water, tampering with it was a serious offense. Peter stands silently as the bailiff announces his crime. He looks pale, his eyes darting nervously between the villagers. His mother stands near the back, wringing her hands, while a group of fishermen whisper animatedly to each other, no doubt comparing this scandal to the time someone tried to pass off spoiled fish as fresh. The Dutch, it seems, had a long tradition of culinary controversies. When Peter is finally placed in the stocks, the crowd exhales, as if a collective sigh has been released. The wooden beams drop into place with a heavy thunk, and suddenly, Peter is no longer just a villager. He's a living lesson in morality. Children peer up at him wide-eyed, while older folks shake their heads in disapproval. Public punishments like this weren't merely about shaming the individual. They were also a kind of community theater. There were no tickets to buy, but everyone was expected to attend, to witness, and to remember. The act of watching reinforced the rules as much as the act of punishing. It's a bit like how today people obsessively follow courtroom dramas on TV. The difference here is that you didn't just watch from a distance. You stood in the mud, heard the sobs, and maybe even smelled the unfortunate consequences if the punished person had been left there too long. You notice something odd about the setup. The stocks are positioned so that Peter faces east, directly into the rising sun. As the light grows brighter, it becomes almost impossible for him to avoid squinting. Historians still debate whether this was intentional, a subtle way to add discomfort without lifting a hand, or just a coincidence of town planning. Either way, it has the effect of making Peter's humiliation literally glaringly obvious. Behind you, a group of teenagers snicker as they recount a tale of a previous punishment. Apparently, a tailor once found himself in the stocks for cheating a wealthy client by sewing pockets so shallow that coins would fall right through them. The irony wasn't lost on the crowd. The tailor who couldn't make proper pockets now couldn't move his arms to reach his own. The ceremony drags on for hours. Villagers come and go, some bringing baskets of vegetables to the market stalls nearby, others pausing to whisper comments or, in rare cases, to offer quiet words of sympathy. Peter's mother slips him a cup of water when the bailiff isn't looking. The crowd pretends not to notice, as if showing a tiny kindness doesn't break the spell of justice. And yet, there's an underlying humor to it all. At one point, a goose escapes from a nearby pen and waddles straight past Peter, honking loudly. The villagers laugh, some joking that even the animals come to witness justice being served. As the day wears on, you begin to sense the deeper purpose behind the ritual. It isn't just about Peter or his watered-down beer. It's about creating a shared experience, something everyone will talk about tonight over their dinners of salted fish and rye bread. Tomorrow, when they rise to milk the cows or mend fishing nets, they'll carry the memory of this morning with them. Toward mid-afternoon, the bailiff returns, striking the stocks with a ceremonial staff. Peter is released, his neck and wrists red and sore. He bows his head, murmuring an apology so soft you almost miss it. The crowd disperses slowly, like mist burned away by the sun, leaving only the empty stocks behind. As you watch the villagers retreat to their homes, you realize that while Peter's punishment has ended, its impact has only just begun. For weeks, maybe months, his name will be whispered in doorways and over fences, becoming part of the living history of this small Dutch village. You glance back at the square one last time. The stocks stand silently, waiting for the next story, the next lesson, the next reminder that in this world, justice is as public as it is peculiar. The wind picks up as you make your way along a narrow lane that hugs the edge of the village. It carries with it the faint smell of fish, smoke, and something metallic, like rusted iron. Ahead you hear a strange jingling sound, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. It's not the merry sound of sleigh bells, or the cheerful clinking of a tavern sign swaying in the breeze. No, this sound has a sharper, more deliberate rhythm, as though it exists purely to draw attention. When you round a corner, you see its source. A thin, wiry man trudging through the street with a series of small bells fastened to his clothing. They dangle from his sleeves, his belt, even his shoes, jingling with every reluctant step he takes. The villagers stop what they're doing to watch him pass. And while no one throws anything or yells, their silence is far more cutting. This is the punishment known as the bells of shame. Unlike the stocks or the pillory, which confine a person in one place, this punishment turns the entire village into a stage. The offender must walk from one end of town to the other, making sure everyone hears him coming. Imagine wearing your disgrace as loudly as a brass band in a library. There's no hiding, no slipping through the shadows. Even if you try to walk softly, the bells betray you. The man today, an unfortunate named Willem, was caught spreading malicious rumors about his neighbor. Gossip, you quickly learn, is treated here almost like theft. After all, stealing someone's reputation can cause just as much harm as stealing their grain or fish. And so Willem's punishment is to become a literal moving warning, a walking symbol of the damage caused by his wagging tongue. The bells themselves are surprisingly ornate for instruments of humiliation. Some are tiny, barely bigger than thimbles, while others are as large as a child's fist. They're made of brass or copper, polished so they gleam in the sunlight. Historians still argue about whether their craftsmanship was meant to enhance the spectacle or simply reflect the villagers' love of fine metalwork. Perhaps it was both. A punishment and a display of the community's wealth, ringing loudly for all to hear. Willem's route takes him past the market, where fishmongers pause mid-sale to watch, holding up slippery herring like accidental props in a silent play. Children giggle and tug at their mother's skirts, eager to get a closer look. A few brave ones even try to mimic his shuffling steps, their laughter rising like a cruel chorus. Willem keeps his eyes fixed on the ground, his face redder than a boiled lobster. As he walks, you notice that the bells create a curious effect. They seem cheerful at first, like the opening notes of a festival dance. But the longer you listen, the more oppressive the sound becomes. It's as if the constant jingling eats away at your nerves, making it impossible to forget the spectacle. That's the genius of this punishment. Even when Willem is out of sight, the echoes of his disgrace linger in the mind. There's an added layer to this ritual that catches your attention. At certain intervals along his route, Willem must stop and recite a short apology. The crowd gathers close, leaning in to hear the exact words. The apology is always the same, a kind of standardized script handed down through generations. I've wronged my neighbor, I've wronged my village, and I walk to remind you not to follow my path. The formality of it gives the whole event a strange rhythm, like a parade, mixed with a courtroom drama. The villagers nod solemnly at his words, though you suspect some are already speculating about what rumors he spread in the first place. After all, humans have a talent for turning punishment into entertainment. A quirky detail, some of the bells are engraved with symbols representing different misdeeds. You spot one shaped like a tiny fishhook, perhaps for lying about a catch, and another carved with a crooked tongue. Over time, these symbols have become a kind of visual code. Children learn to recognize them almost like an alphabet of shame. Imagine being able to glance at a single bell and instantly know your neighbor's entire scandalous story. It's public shaming and public education rolled into one noisy package. The punishment lasts for 3 full circuits of the village. By the second round, Willem's shoulders sag and his pace slows. The bells, once merely humiliating, now seem physically exhausting. The weight of them digs into his skin, leaving faint red marks that will take days to fade. Historians debate whether this added discomfort was intentional or simply a side effect. But either way, it drives home the lesson. On the final circuit, Willem passes a group of older women seated on a bench outside the church. They don't laugh or whisper. Instead, they watch with stern, unblinking eyes like a jury silently delivering its verdict. One of them clutches a small wooden cross, perhaps as a reminder that mercy is possible, though rarely granted easily in this village. When Willem completes his walk, the bailiff steps forward and unfastens the bells one by one. Each removal feels symbolic, as if stripping away the layers of disgrace. The bells are gathered into a wooden chest, where they'll wait patiently for the next offender. Willem bows low, murmuring his final apology. Then, without a word, he slips into the crowd, disappearing like mist dissolving into morning sunlight. As the villagers disperse, you realize the brilliance of this punishment. It doesn't just discipline the guilty, it teaches everyone else to mind their words. In a community this small, reputation is currency, and one careless rumor can spark feuds lasting generations. The bells, loud and clear, ensure no one forgets that lesson. Somewhere in the distance, you think you hear one final jingle, or perhaps it's just the wind playing tricks. Either way, the sound lingers, a ghostly echo of shame drifting through the narrow streets. You wander deeper into the village, following a narrow canal that snakes between rows of low, tidy houses. The water glistens in the late afternoon sun, reflecting the orange glow of brick chimneys and fluttering laundry lines strung between windows. It's peaceful here, almost idyllic, but you know by now that beneath this tranquil surface lurks a network of rules, customs, and yes, punishments waiting to be enforced. Near the canal's edge, you come across a curious wooden structure unlike the stocks or pillory you saw earlier. It resembles a crude chair balanced on a long beam, like a seesaw built by someone with a dark sense of humor. The beam juts out over the water, its far end dangling just above the surface. Villagers glance at it as they pass, their expressions somewhere between amusement and dread. This, you realize, must be the infamous ducking stool. The ducking stool is reserved for a very specific type of offender: gossipers, naggers, and those accused of sowing discord within the community. It's a punishment meant less to injure than to humble, though you suspect that the line between humility and hypothermia was rather thin in these chilly Dutch waters. A small crowd gathers as the bailiff and his assistants bring forward today's unlucky participant, a woman named Ankie, whose sharp tongue has apparently caused weeks of unrest. According to whispers in the crowd, she accused her neighbor of hiding extra butter during a recent food shortage. Whether this is true or not, the accusation set off a storm of arguments that disrupted trade and Sunday worship alike. In this village, words have weight, and Ankie's words have tipped the balance too far. Anke stands defiantly at first, her arms crossed, her linen cap pulled tightly over her head. The bailiff announces her crime in a voice that carries across the water, the sound mingling with the cries of distant gulls. As he speaks, two assistants secure Ankie to the chair with rough ropes. The design is surprisingly efficient, almost like a piece of farming equipment repurposed for justice. Once she's tied, the beam creaks as villagers lift the opposite end, tilting the chair out over the canal. There's a collective hush, broken only by the rhythmic splashing of water against the pilings. Then, with a sharp command, the beam tips fully forward, plunging Ankie into the canal with a tremendous splash. The crowd gasps, then murmurs approvingly. You can't help but notice a few suppressed giggles, though whether they're at Ankie's plight or the absurdity of the contraption itself is hard to say. Ankie resurfaces, sputtering and shivering, her linen cap now plastered to her head like a wilted cabbage leaf. The assistants quickly hoist the beam back up, letting her catch her breath before dunking her again. Historians still argue about the origins of this punishment. Some trace it back to medieval Europe, where ducking stools were sometimes used to test accusations of witchcraft. If the accused floated, they were guilty. If they sank, well, at least they were innocent. Others believe the Dutch adapted the practice into something less fatal, but still deeply symbolic. Water here is life, livelihood, and danger all at once. To be forcibly immersed in it is to be reminded of one's place in the community's delicate ecosystem. The ritual continues, 3 dunks in total, each one punctuated by a dramatic pause. Between dunks, the bailiff recites a short verse about harmony and silence, his voice steady and unyielding. The villagers respond in unison, a strange call and response that turns punishment into a communal performance. It's equal parts justice, theater, and village gossip, rolled into one very wet package. A quirky detail catches your eye. Painted on the side of the ducking stool are small symbols, almost like tally marks. Each represents a previous offender who has taken the plunge. The oldest marks are faded nearly to nothing, while the most recent are sharp and bright. It's a visual history of discord and reconciliation, etched into the very wood of the device. As Anki emerges from her final dunk, dripping and gasping, the assistants untie her and help her to the shore. Her once proud posture is gone, replaced by a subdued shuffle. Whether she's truly repentant or simply cold is impossible to say. The crowd disperses, some whispering about how long her newfound silence will last. Children splash their hands in the water, laughing as if the whole thing were a game. You linger a moment longer, studying the canal. The water ripples where Anki struggled, then slowly smooths over, as if swallowing the memory of her punishment. It strikes you how symbolic this is. Conflict disrupts the surface of village life, but with enough effort, and perhaps a few dunks, it can return to calm. There's a debate among modern scholars about whether the ducking stool was more humiliating than harmful. Some argue that it was a relatively mild punishment compared to whipping or imprisonment. Others point out that cold water, fear, and public shame can leave scars just as deep as physical wounds. Both sides agree, however, that the spectacle was as important as the act itself. The villagers didn't just punish Anki, they reaffirmed their shared values by watching her punishment together. As the sun dips lower, casting golden streaks across the canal, you hear the faint creak of the ducking stool settling back into place. It stands there silently, waiting for the next sharp-tongued villager to test the patience of their neighbors. The sight sends a shiver down your spine, though whether from the evening chill or the unsettling efficiency of communal justice, you can't quite tell. Behind you, a group of women laugh softly, already spinning today's events into tomorrow's gossip. The irony isn't lost on you. In a village like this, even punishing gossip creates more stories to tell. Evening settles gently over the village, draping the rooftops in a lavender haze as the last rays of sunlight slip away. The marketplace quiets. The clinking of coins and shouts of vendors replaced by the soft murmur of families heading home for supper. You follow the crowd as they drift toward a small open square near the church, where another peculiar form of justice is about to unfold. This punishment doesn't involve ropes, water, or jingling bells. It's quieter, simpler, and in many ways far more humbling. At the center of the square sits a rough wooden bench and a single table. Upon it rests a small loaf of coarse rye bread and a clay jug of cloudy water. This setup looks almost absurdly plain, yet it carries immense symbolic weight. Today, a man named Joris will be subjected to what the villagers call bread and water days. A punishment designed not to harm the body so much as the spirit. Joris is led forward by the bailiff, his head bowed and his wooden shoes clacking softly on the cobblestones. You notice how thin he looks, his cheeks hollowed from a week of anxiety and poor sleep. His crime is relatively minor by modern standards. He failed to repair a section of communal dike that protected the fields from flooding. In this watery land where every inch of fertile soil is precious, such negligence is seen as a betrayal of the entire village. The punishment is simple. For 3 days, Joris will be fed nothing but bread and water in full view of his neighbors. During the day, he must sit at this table, eating only what is provided. At night, he will sleep on a straw mat in the church vestibule, where anyone passing by can see him through the open doors. It is not solitary confinement. It is public penance, as visible as the pillory or the stocks, but far quieter. As Joris sits down, the bailiff announces his crime in a slow, deliberate voice. A small crowd has gathered. Mothers with children, old fishermen, even a few curious dogs weaving through the onlookers' legs. Unlike the noisy spectacle of the ducking stool, this scene has a strangely solemn atmosphere. The villagers do not laugh or jeer. Instead, they stand in thoughtful silence, as if witnessing a sacred ritual. The bread is coarse and dark, made from rye flour mixed with bits of bran. It's the kind of bread usually reserved for hard times, when wheat is scarce and bellies are empty. The water, drawn from a nearby well, is cloudy and slightly metallic. Joris takes his first bite slowly, his jaw working with effort. The sound of chewing is oddly loud in the hushed square, and you realize how much the punishment relies on symbolism. Each bite represents his acceptance of guilt, his willingness to endure discomfort for the sake of harmony. Historians still argue about the origins of bread and water days. Some believe it grew out of religious fasting traditions, where deprivation was seen as a way to cleanse the soul. Others claim it was purely practical, a punishment cheap to administer and impossible to mistake for luxury. Whatever the truth, the effect is clear. Joris's meager meal is as much a sermon as a sentence. A quirky detail catches your attention. Next to the table, a small hourglass slowly trickles sand from top to bottom. The villagers use it to measure Joris's eating time. When the sand runs out, he must stop, whether he has finished his bread or not. It's a silent, visual reminder that his control over his own life is temporarily suspended. Even time itself is part of his punishment. As the evening progresses, villagers take turns approaching the table. Some offer quiet words of encouragement, telling Joris to endure with dignity. Others simply watch, their expressions unreadable. Children are brought forward to witness the scene, their wide eyes taking in the lesson. In this village, punishment is not hidden away. It is woven into the fabric of daily life, as common as tending goats or mending nets. There is a moment of unexpected tenderness when an elderly woman slips a sprig of rosemary onto the table beside the bread. It's a small gesture, symbolic, rather than practical. Rosemary, you recall, has long been associated with remembrance and healing. Joris glances at her, his eyes briefly filling with tears, then quickly looks away. Even in punishment, there is room for compassion. As darkness falls, a lantern is lit and placed beside the table. Its warm glow creates a pool of light in the center of the square, drawing moths and deepening the shadows beyond. Joris sits quietly, hands folded in his lap, while the villagers drift away to their homes. Only the bailiff remains, standing silently like a sentry. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth, mingling with the faint sour scent of rye bread. Later that night, you slip into the church vestibule to see where Joris will sleep. The straw mat is thin and uneven, offering little comfort. Beside it sits a bucket of water and another small loaf, ready for the morning. You imagine Joris lying here in the cold, listening to the creak of the old church beams and the distant barking of dogs. It must feel like exile, even though he is still at the heart of his community. Some modern historians compare this punishment to house arrest, noting that its power lies in visibility rather than confinement. Unlike a modern prison, which hides away its inmates, the bread and water ritual keeps the offender firmly in the public eye. Every villager sees his penance. Every child learns from his example. The lesson is not just for Joris, it is for everyone. By the third day, the physical toll will begin to show. His cheeks will hollow further, his movements will slow, and his voice will weaken. When he is finally released, he will return to his home, not as an outcast, but as someone reintegrated into the community through shared suffering. It's a strange kind of justice, equal parts punishment and redemption. As you step back into the cool night air, you glance one last time at the lantern-lit square. The hourglass glimmers faintly, its sand nearly spent. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird calls, its lonely note echoing across the canal. You wonder if Joris can hear it too, lying awake on his bed of straw, counting the hours until dawn and the slow restoration of his honor. The square grows quiet again, as though holding its breath. Tomorrow, the bread will be stale, the water cold, and the ritual will continue. Morning breaks, with a pale, watery light filtering through the village, casting long, thin shadows on the cobblestones. You hear the clatter of wooden shoes on stone, and the distant lowing of cattle being driven to pasture. The air smells faintly of smoke from hearth fires and the briny tang of the nearby sea. Today, there's a different kind of punishment scheduled, one that involves both spectacle and symbolism, and perhaps a little too much noise for this sleepy village. In the square, you notice a tall wooden post, rising like a lonely mast, its surface worn smooth from years of use. This is the whipping post, though to modern eyes, it looks almost like a signpost that has long since lost its sign. It stands near the edge of the marketplace, close enough for everyone to gather around, but far enough from the church to keep things appropriately secular. This morning, the villagers gather in a loose circle around it, their faces expectant, but not bloodthirsty. In this community, even punishment has an air of calm ritual. Standing near the post is a young man named Hendrik, his arms bound lightly at the wrists. He's tall and lean, with the sun-weathered skin of someone who spends most of his days fishing along the canals. His crime? Drunkenness and disorderly conduct, which, in the 17th century, was less about personal embarrassment and more about threatening the harmony of the group. In a place where everyone relies on everyone else, whether for dike maintenance or shared fishing rights, a single night of rowdy behavior can ripple through the village like a stone dropped in a still pond. As the bailiff steps forward to read Hendrik's charge, you notice a curious detail. At Hendrik's feet lies a pair of unusually large wooden shoes, far larger than any person could actually wear. They're painted a bright yellow and decorated with swirling patterns of blue and white. At first glance, they seem almost comical, like props from a carnival, but you soon realize they are a critical part of today's punishment. The bailiff explains in his steady, measured voice. Hendrik will receive 3 symbolic strikes with a willow switch, not enough to harm him severely, but enough to make a point. Afterward, he must place his feet inside these oversized wooden shoes and parade slowly around the square while the villagers watch. It's a ritual meant to mark his foolishness and exaggerate it, literally enlarging his misstep for all to see. The first strike lands with a sharp snap, and the crowd collectively inhales. Hendrik flinches, but he does not cry out. The second and third strikes follow in quick succession, and then the bailiff steps back. Hendrik's face is red, whether from pain, shame, or both. You can't quite tell. He slips his feet into the ridiculous shoes and begins his slow, awkward circuit around the square. Each step produces a hollow clomp that echoes off the surrounding buildings. Historians still argue about the origin of this peculiar practice. Some believe the oversized shoes symbolize the idea of walking a mile in someone else's experience, a kind of forced empathy. Others think they were simply a humorous way to exaggerate a person's faults, much like the pointed hats used with the pillory. There's even a fringe theory that the shoes were once used in fertility rituals, though no one seems eager to test that idea today. As Hendrik shuffles along, the crowd responds with quiet chuckles rather than outright laughter. This is no cruel mob scene. It's more like a collective sigh of relief. By enduring this ritual, Hendrik reassures everyone that order has been restored. Even the children seem to understand the lesson, their wide eyes following every exaggerated step. A quirky detail you notice. Carved into the side of each giant shoe are small images of fish and waves, a nod to the village's reliance on fishing. The symbolism is clear. Just as Hendrik must walk carefully in these unwieldy shoes, so must the entire community navigate the delicate balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility. One false step, and everyone feels the consequences. Once Hendrik completes his circuit, he stops at the whipping post and bows deeply to the assembled crowd. The oversized shoes are removed and placed carefully back beside the post, ready for the next offender. The villagers applaud softly, not in celebration of his pain, but in recognition of his return to the fold. In a place where survival depends on cooperation, forgiveness is as essential as punishment. As the crowd disperses, you overhear snippets of conversation. An older man jokes that Hendrik's shoes were so big they could sail across the canal like tiny boats. A group of women debate whether the punishment was too lenient, while a younger fisherman mutters that it's better than losing a valuable crew member to imprisonment. The diversity of opinions is striking, yet all agree on one point: the ritual has worked. The village feels stable again, at least for now. Standing near the empty whipping post, you run your fingers over the smooth wood. It's worn not from violence, but from countless hands, ropes, and symbolic strikes. The texture is strangely comforting, like a well-used tool passed down through generations. It reminds you that punishment here is not about cruelty, it's about continuity. These rituals are threads in a tapestry woven over centuries. As the last villagers drift away, Hendrik lingers for a moment, speaking quietly with the bailiff. You can't hear their words, but you catch a glimpse of Hendrik's face. There's a mixture of relief and determination there, as if he's resolved never to return to this particular stage again. He walks away, barefoot now, his regular wooden shoes tucked under one arm. The oversized shoes remain in the square, silent and still. They seem almost comical without anyone inside them, yet they carry a strange gravity. They are a reminder that in this village, even missteps can be corrected, provided one is willing to walk the long, awkward path back to harmony. As you turn to leave, you hear a final clomp echo faintly behind you. Whether it's real or just your imagination, you can't be sure. In a place where symbolism and reality intertwine, sometimes the echoes linger long after the ritual ends. The following day dawns with a pale, silvery light spilling over the rooftops, glinting off the slow-moving canal water. The village awakens slowly, the rhythmic sound of wooden shoes tapping against stone echoing between narrow lanes. Today there's an unusual buzz of anticipation in the air, not because of punishment itself, but because of a story everyone in the village knows. A tale passed down through gossip, half-remembered facts, and exaggerated gestures. It's the story of the lazy miller, a man whose punishment was so peculiar and memorable that people still whisper about it decades later. As you make your way toward the old windmill at the edge of the village, you can almost hear the creak of its wooden blades turning lazily in the cold breeze. This mill once fed the entire community by grinding grain into flour. In the 17th century, the miller wasn't just a tradesman. He was a vital part of the village's survival. If he slacked off, the whole community suffered. And as you might guess from his nickname, this miller did a whole lot of slacking. The story begins during a particularly harsh winter. Snow blanketed the dikes, and the canals froze so solidly that children skated on them as if they were smooth roads. Food supplies dwindled, and tempers frayed. In this difficult season, the miller, a man named Barrett, decided he simply couldn't be bothered to run the mill consistently. Instead, he spent his days napping by the fire, drinking warm ale, and, according to some versions of the tale, composing ridiculous songs about geese. Historians still argue about whether Barrett was truly lazy or simply overwhelmed by poor equipment and bad weather. Perhaps he lacked help or faced mechanical failures he couldn't fix. But to the villagers, it didn't matter. What they saw was a man failing to do his duty, jeopardizing everyone's survival in the process. The breaking point came when several families went without bread for a week because Barent hadn't processed enough grain. Angry villagers stormed the mill demanding answers. They found him asleep, snoring loudly beside an empty flour sack. That image alone, Barent sprawled out like a cat while the whole village went hungry, was enough to seal his fate. From that moment, the punishment practically wrote itself. Barent was dragged to the square, where the bailiff and elders quickly decided on a public spectacle fitting his crimes. The punishment would be both humiliating and symbolic, a performance the whole village would remember. On the appointed day, Barent was dressed in a ridiculous costume. His tunic was patched with bright colors like a jester's, and atop his head sat a large cap, shaped like a flour sack, stitched clumsily together with twine. Strapped to his back was a small wooden model of a windmill, its blades spinning with every step he took. Even from a distance, he looked like a walking caricature of his own laziness. The villagers gathered early, eager to witness this peculiar event. Children squealed with laughter at Barent's ridiculous appearance, while adults murmured their approval of the punishment's clever symbolism. The bailiff declared that Barent would spend the entire day grinding flour by hand in full view of everyone. Instead of using the mighty wind-powered mill, he would kneel over a small hand mill, sweating and straining while the crowd watched. Barent's task was nearly impossible. The tiny hand mill produced only a handful of flour at a time. Each turn of the handle was an effort, his muscles burning as he tried to keep up. The symbolism was clear. Had he done his job properly in the first place, he wouldn't now be suffering in front of the entire community. Throughout the day, villagers took turns bringing sacks of grain for Barent to grind. Some were serious about the process, determined to make him work. Others treated it like theater, deliberately bringing extra sacks just to see his face fall in despair. A group of fishermen even brought wet, salty grain that clogged the mill, and forced Barent to stop and unclog it repeatedly. It was a punishment and a comedy routine rolled into one. A quirky tidbit. While Barent worked, a group of children circled him, chanting a mocking rhyme that roughly translated to, "Lazy windmill turns no grain, lazy man brings only pain." The rhyme became so popular that for years afterward, parents used it to scold their children into doing chores. At midday, the bailiff announced a special twist. Barent would be allowed to rest only while standing on a small platform shaped like the mill's foundation. If he stepped off, even for a moment, he'd be dunked in the canal. An icy reminder of the ducking stool punishment you witnessed earlier. This kept him balanced and trembling, like a circus performer who couldn't afford to slip. Historians still debate whether this punishment was typical or entirely unique to this village. Some argue it was an elaborate one-time event meant to restore communal harmony during a particularly tense winter. Others believe similar performances may have occurred across the region, blending justice with entertainment in ways that defy modern categorization. By evening, Barent was drenched in sweat, his hands blistered from turning the tiny mill. The crowd, though tired from standing, remained attentive. They weren't there to see him break physically, but to see the social order restored through ritual. At the final moment, Barent presented a single loaf of bread made from the flour he had ground. It was small, lumpy, and hardly worth eating, but the gesture mattered more than the product. The bailiff accepted the loaf solemnly and held it aloft for all to see. Then, in a gesture of forgiveness, he broke the bread and handed pieces to the gathered families. Barent collapsed onto the platform, exhausted and humiliated. The villagers dispersed, murmuring with satisfaction. For weeks afterward, people spoke of the punishment, using it as a cautionary tale for their children. Even decades later, the story lingers like a faint echo, told and retold by flickering firelight on winter nights. As you stand by the old windmill now, you can almost hear the distant sound of grinding grain and mocking rhymes. The wind stirs the mill's great wooden blades, turning them slowly against the sky. It's a reminder that laziness, like the wind, can be invisible but powerfully disruptive. You turn back toward the village, reflecting on how punishment here isn't just about discipline. It's about weaving stories that endure, shaping the community's identity long after the actual event fades into memory. The memory of Barent's humiliation lingers in your mind as you walk back toward the village square. The sun is sinking now, its golden light spilling across the canal like molten brass. Evening shadows stretch long and thin, and the air carries a hint of wood smoke and salt. You pass by a group of villagers gathered near a stable, their voices hushed and serious. Something is about to happen again, you realize. Another ritual, another peculiar punishment, this one quieter than the others but no less symbolic. At the center of the square, the bailiff stands waiting, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Next to him is a simple, rough-hewn walking staff, its wood worn smooth from countless hands. Beside the staff lies a folded piece of cloth, plain, unadorned, and gray. You glance at the gathering crowd and notice the mood here feels different. There is no laughter, no whispering jokes or mocking chants. This ritual is about humility, not humor. The bailiff clears his throat and announces the evening's event, a public apology walk where the guilty party must travel slowly through every street of the village, bowing deeply to each person they encounter while reciting a formal apology. The wrongdoer tonight is a woman named Marit, known for her fiery temper. A week ago, she threw a clay pot at her sister-in-law during a heated argument about an inheritance dispute. The pot shattered, and though no one was hurt, the incident sparked a feud that threatened to divide the village into factions. The punishment is simple yet deeply symbolic. By walking the entire length of the village, Marit will retrace her steps, metaphorically repairing the path she disrupted with her anger. The cloth will be draped over her shoulders like a mantle of shame, and the walking staff will serve as a reminder that her journey is not just physical, but moral. The bailiff places the cloth carefully around Marit's shoulders, tying it so it hangs heavily down her back. It looks almost like a monk's robe, emphasizing humility rather than ridicule. Then he hands her the staff and recites the words of the traditional apology. I have broken the peace of my neighbors. I have sown discord among friends. By these steps I seek forgiveness, and by my bow I seek to mend the ties I have torn. Marit repeats the words, her voice trembling. The crowd watches in total silence. Even the children seem to understand the gravity of the moment. There is no cheering, no mockery, only the quiet expectation that justice is being carried out. As Marit begins her slow walk, the villagers follow at a respectful distance. She moves from one house to the next, stopping at each doorway to bow deeply. At every stop, the head of the household steps forward to acknowledge her apology. Some accept it with a solemn nod, while others place a hand gently on her shoulder, signaling forgiveness. A few remain cold, simply turning away, which feels like its own kind of punishment. Historians still argue about whether this ritual originated from religious penance practices or from older pre-Christian traditions of communal reconciliation. Some evidence suggests it may have evolved from medieval pilgrimages, where walking itself was seen as a form of spiritual cleansing. Others see it as purely practical, a way to physically demonstrate one's willingness to rejoin the community. You notice that the villagers have set out small oil lamps along the route. Their flickering flames create pools of warm light, turning the narrow streets into a glowing pathway. It's beautiful, in a quiet, haunting way. The lamps also ensure that everyone can see Marit's progress, reinforcing the public nature of her atonement. This isn't a private apology whispered in a corner. It's a living story, played out before the entire village. A quirky detail catches your eye. At the end of the route, near the edge of the fields, a small wooden arch has been erected. It's decorated with branches of rosemary and sprigs of lavender, both herbs long associated with healing and renewal. When Marit reaches this point, she will pass under the arch as a symbolic gesture of leaving her conflict behind. As the procession winds its way through the village, you overhear bits of conversation. An elderly woman murmurs to her grandson about a time, decades ago, when a farmer had to perform the same ritual for accidentally flooding another man's field. A young fisherman whispers to his wife that he hopes never to find himself in Marit's position. These stories, old and new, mingle in the cool evening air, weaving a tapestry of shared memory. Halfway through the walk, Marit falters. The cloth is heavy, and the staff feels like a burden. The villagers fall silent, holding their breath. Then a small girl steps forward from the crowd and offers Marit a cup of water. It's a simple, spontaneous act, and it seems to renew Marit's strength. She nods gratefully and continues, her bowing deeper and more deliberate now. Even in punishment, kindness has a place. As she approaches the final stretch, the crowd grows denser. People light extra lamps, their flames reflecting in the canal like twin constellations. The atmosphere feels almost sacred, like a festival of forgiveness. When Marit finally passes under the rosemary arch, the villagers erupt in gentle applause. Some cheer softly, while others wipe away tears. The ritual is complete. Historians note that such public apology walks were often more effective than physical punishments. By making amends openly, the offender not only restores their own honor, but also strengthens the bonds of the entire community. Still, debates remain about whether the pressure to perform forgiveness publicly might have been too great. Did Marit truly feel redeemed? Or was she merely playing a role in a communal play? As the crowd disperses, you remain by the arch for a moment, watching the last lamps flicker out. In the darkness that follows, you can almost feel the tension dissolve, like mist rising from the canal. The village breathes easier now, its harmony restored, at least until the next conflict arises. You glance back toward the square where the cloth and staff have been placed carefully on a bench. They wait patiently for the next person who must walk the long, humbling path of public apology. The next morning dawns with the distinct salty tang of the sea drifting inland. The market square is already alive with activity. Fishmongers arrange their slippery wares on rough wooden tables, the air thick with the smell of herring, cod, and smoked eel. Fishermen call out prices while wives haggle loudly, their voices mingling with the cries of gulls wheeling overhead. This bustling scene seems ordinary at first glance, but today, the market will serve as the stage for yet another peculiar punishment, one that blends justice with the very livelihood of the village. You weave through the crowd, following as in the sound of laughter and the unmistakable squelch of something unpleasant underfoot. Near the docks, a small platform has been erected. Beside it are several large barrels filled with fish guts, scales glimmering in the morning sun like tiny pieces of silver. Nets are piled haphazardly nearby, their ropes damp and smelling strongly of salt. A few children chase each other between the barrels, daring one another to touch the slimy heaps and squealing with exaggerated disgust. The bailiff stands tall at the center, flanked by two assistants holding long-handled nets. His face is grim, though you detect a hint of theatrical flair in the way he scans the crowd. Today's offender is a fisherman named Klaas, a broad-shouldered man with a weather-beaten face. His crime? Selling spoiled fish at the last market day, then attempting to pass it off as freshly caught. In a community where trust is everything, this was no small offense. Fish is not just food here, it is the heartbeat of the village economy. If one fisherman cheats, it casts suspicion on them all. The punishment, therefore, must be both memorable and symbolic. The bailiff announces Klaas's wrongdoing in a voice that carries over the noisy square. As he speaks, villagers shake their heads, muttering disapprovingly. You catch fragments of conversation. A woman worrying about her children's health, a fisherman complaining about tarnished reputations. When the announcement ends, a hush falls. Everyone leans forward, eager to see what comes next. Klaas is led to the platform and made to stand barefoot, his feet sinking slightly into the slimy wooden boards. The assistants drape a heavy fishing net over his shoulders like a grotesque cloak. Its rough fibers dig into his skin, leaving red marks almost immediately. Then, to the crowd's mixed delight and revulsion, one of the barrels is upended at Klaas's feet. A wave of fish guts and viscera spills out, spreading in a pungent tide. The smell is overwhelming, a rank, sour stench that clings to the back of your throat. The punishment begins. Klaas must clean the mess entirely by hand, gathering the slippery remains and placing them back into the barrels. He is forbidden to use tools or even rinse his hands until the task is complete. The crowd watches intently as he crouches and scoops handful after handful of cold, slimy refuse. Each squelching sound draws murmurs of disgust and occasional laughter. A group of boys start chanting a mocking rhyme about Klaas and his rotten catch, their voices carrying through the salty air. Historians still argue about the origins of this practice. Some see it as purely practical, making the offender clean what he sullied. Others interpret it as a ritual cleansing of the community's honor, a way to symbolically wash away deceit with sweat and humiliation. A fringe theory suggests it may even have roots in ancient sea god worship, where fish remains were offerings of appeasement, though, admittedly, there's little hard evidence to support that idea. As Klaas works, the assistants occasionally shake the net draped over him, causing it to tangle around his arms and legs. This adds to his difficulty and reminds everyone watching that deceit ensnares not only the guilty, but also those who rely on them. The symbolism is heavy-handed, but undeniably effective. A quirky detail. Near the edge of the platform, a small wooden plaque lists the names of past offenders punished in this exact way. The earliest entries are barely legible, worn by sea air and time. Newer ones are crisp and sharp, a living record of communal memory. Klaas's name will be added today, a permanent reminder etched into wood. Halfway through, the bailiff introduces the second stage of the ritual. Klaas must now walk through the market wearing the net still covered in fish guts, while shouting a confession. The assistants hand him a small bell to ring as he walks, ensuring everyone hears him coming. It's a bizarre blend of the bells of shame you witnessed earlier and a marketplace parade. The crowd parts reluctantly as Klaas trudges forward, leaving a trail of fishy residue on the stones. His voice cracks as he shouts, "I sold foul fish, and I dishonored my trade," over and over. Some villagers jeer, others look away, clearly embarrassed for him. Children giggle and pinch their noses dramatically. The smell is so overpowering that even the gulls circle closer, drawn by the promise of scraps. By the time Klaas completes his circuit, he is visibly shaking. His hands are raw. His shoulders sag beneath the weight of the net, and his eyes glisten with unshed tears. Whether from shame or the stench, you can't be certain. The bailiff steps forward, removes the net, and pronounces the punishment complete. In a final flourish, the remaining fish guts are carried to the edge of the docks and dumped into the canal. The water churns briefly as hungry gulls swoop down, their cries filling the air. It feels oddly cathartic, as if the village itself has been cleansed. The crowd disperses, returning to their stalls and bargaining as though nothing had happened. Life resumes its rhythm, but you can feel the subtle shift in mood. Trust has been restored, at least for now. You linger by the empty barrels, reflecting on what you've seen. Historians debate whether such punishments were cruel or necessary, but there's no denying their theatrical power. In a world without newspapers or courts, public ritual was the glue that held communities together. Justice here isn't just about law, it's about storytelling, shared and remembered by everyone who witnessed it. As you turn to leave, a faint breeze carries the lingering smell of fish. It clings stubbornly to your clothes, a sensory reminder that some lessons, like certain odors, are not easily forgotten. The afternoon sunlight filters through the narrow windows of a small building near the edge of the square, casting thin, golden beams across a simple wooden bench. Unlike the lively chaos of the fish market, this space is hushed and still. You can almost hear the dust settling. Here sits the gossip bench, an unassuming piece of furniture that has witnessed countless whispered secrets, angry outbursts, and silent tears. It doesn't look like much, just a sturdy bench with slightly curved legs and a smooth, worn seat. But in this village, it holds a particular kind of authority. The gossip bench is reserved for a very specific crime: slander. While the ducking stool you saw earlier was for more disruptive, dramatic troublemakers, the bench is a quieter punishment for those whose words have cut deeply, but subtly, like a knife hidden beneath silk. In a tightly knit community like this, words are as powerful as swords. They can topple reputations, ruin marriages, and sow distrust between neighbors. And so the bench exists to remind everyone just how heavy words can be. Today, the offender is a middle-aged woman named Greta, well known for her sharp tongue and her uncanny ability to know everyone's business before they do. She arrives flanked by two stern-looking women who guide her to the bench without force, but with undeniable authority. Greta's face is pale and tight, her lips pressed together in defiance. She sits stiffly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. It's clear she's determined to show no weakness, though the crowd gathered outside the open windows might sense otherwise. The punishment is simple yet profoundly symbolic. Greta must sit on the bench in complete silence for 6 full hours. She may not speak, gesture, or even hum. Her only allowed movement is to lower her head when villagers enter to observe her. Meanwhile, others are free to come and go, standing nearby to watch, or simply go about their errands while pointedly ignoring her. In this way, the silence becomes a form of social exile, a living reminder of the harm her words have caused. The bailiff announces the start of the punishment in a calm, almost ceremonial tone. Today, the tongue is still. Today, the ears of the village may rest. His voice carries through the small space, echoing off the bare walls. Greta doesn't flinch, though a muscle twitches near her temple. A quirky detail you notice: above the bench hangs a small wooden plaque carved with a single ear. It's polished smooth from generations of careful handling, and below it, a short phrase is inscribed: "Speak wisely, for silence remembers." The villagers treat this plaque almost like a sacred relic, touching it lightly before leaving the room, as if sealing a vow of discretion. Historians still argue about whether the gossip bench was primarily punitive or restorative. Some see it as a form of forced meditation, giving the offender time to reflect. Others view it as purely public humiliation, a way to make the slanderer feel powerless under the weight of their own silence. Either way, it's a fascinating example of how justice here values symbolism over spectacle. As the hours pass, Greta's discomfort becomes increasingly visible. At first, she sits upright, her back ramrod straight. By the second hour, her shoulders slump. By the third, she shifts her weight slightly, as if the wooden seat has grown harder beneath her. The sunlight moves across the floor in slow arcs, marking the passage of time like a quiet, relentless judge. Outside, villagers take turns peeking through the open window, their faces unreadable. Some bring small tokens, a loaf of bread, a sprig of lavender, and leave them silently near the door. These offerings are not for Greta's comfort, but for their own sense of closure. You overhear a group of women whispering near the doorway. They speculate about the exact words Greta used, trying to piece together the chain of events that led to this day. Ironically, their hushed gossip mirrors the very behavior that put Greta on the bench. The cycle of rumor and judgment seems endless, like the turning of a millstone. At the 4th hour, a child enters, holding his mother's hand. He stares wide-eyed at Greta, then whispers a question. His mother bends low and murmurs an answer you can barely catch. She's learning to be quiet. The boy nods solemnly, his face full of wonder and confusion. It strikes you that this punishment isn't just for Greta, it's for everyone watching. A living lesson about the power of restraint. The fifth hour drags slowly. Greta's breathing grows shallow, her lips trembling slightly as if words are trying to escape. The room feels heavy with unspoken thoughts, a tension more oppressive than any shouted accusation. Even you find yourself holding your breath, caught up in the stillness. Finally, as the sixth hour begins, the bailiff returns. He places a small cup of water on the floor beside Greta's feet and addresses the crowd. Silence has spoken. The debt is paid. His voice is low but firm, carrying the weight of finality. Greta bows her head deeply, then rises, her knees stiff and her face pale. She walks out without looking at anyone, disappearing into the crowd like a shadow melting into dusk. The villagers file out slowly, their murmurs subdued. Some seem satisfied, others troubled. Historians debate whether this ritual truly prevented further slander or merely drove it underground, where whispers turned sharper and more dangerous. Perhaps both are true. In a place where everyone's lives are intertwined, absolute silence is impossible. And maybe that's the point. As the room empties, you take one last look at the simple bench. The wooden plaque above it gleams softly in the fading light. Speak wisely, for silence remembers. The words seem to linger in the air, a reminder that even when voices fall silent, their echoes remain. Outside, the evening breeze carries the faint sounds of laughter and conversation. Life resumes its usual rhythm. But you know that, for Greta, and for everyone who witnessed her punishment, the weight of those 6 silent hours will not soon be forgotten. The night settles softly over the village, bringing with it the scent of peat smoke and the faint tang of brine from the nearby sea. Windows glow warmly, small beacons against the dark, and you can hear muffled laughter drifting from one building in particular, the local tavern. The tavern is the heart of this community after sundown, a place where fishermen, farmers, and weavers gather to swap stories, drink ale, and thaw their cold bones after a day of hard work. But as you step closer, you realize not every sound spilling out into the night is joyous. Beneath the laughter lies an undercurrent of tension, a raised voice here, a sharp retort there, the unmistakable scrape of a chair being dragged hastily across a wooden floor. Tonight, you're about to witness another form of peculiar justice, this time dealing with drunkenness and tavern crimes, offenses that are as old as the tavern itself. Inside, the air is thick and warm, heavy with the smell of stale ale, roasting meat, and damp wool. Lanterns hang from low beams, their flickering light casting deep shadows on the crowded room. Villagers cluster at rough-hewn tables, mugs clutched in their hands, cheeks flushed from drink and storytelling. In the far corner, a fiddler plays a lively tune, though his bow falters occasionally as his eyes dart nervously toward the commotion brewing near the center of the room. At the heart of the disturbance is a man named Dirk, well known for both his strength and his quick temper. Tonight he has clearly indulged in too much ale. His tunic is stained, his speech slurred, and his gestures dangerously wide. A toppled mug lies on the floor beside him, its contents soaking into the rushes scattered across the tavern floor. A smaller, wiry man stands opposite him, fists clenched. It seems a disagreement about a fishing net, who owns it, who repaired it, has escalated into a shouting match. The tavern keeper, a stout woman named Annalisa, tries to intervene, but Dirk brushes her off, his anger rising like a tide. Just when it seems fists will fly, the heavy door swings open and the bailiff steps in, accompanied by 2 assistants. The music stops. Conversations cease. Even the fire in the hearth seems to quiet itself, as if holding its breath. Dirk blinks at the sudden silence, swaying slightly. He knows what's coming. This isn't the first time a night of excessive drinking has ended with an appearance by the village authorities. The bailiff doesn't shout or scold. He simply raises one hand, and the crowd parts like a receding wave. The punishment for drunken disorder here is unique, blending humor and humility in a way that ensures everyone remembers the lesson. Dirk is guided firmly but gently to the center of the tavern. The bailiff retrieves a peculiar object from a nearby shelf, a wooden collar, shaped like a giant mug painted with crude designs of fish and barley stalks. The sight of it draws a ripple of laughter from the crowd, though no one dares laugh too loudly. Historians still debate whether this punishment originated as a joke that became tradition, or if it was deliberately crafted to channel disorder into harmless spectacle. Either way, the symbolism is clear. The giant mug represents Dirk's vice, and by wearing it, he becomes a living warning to others. The bailiff places the collar over Dirk's head. It rests on his shoulders like an oversized yoke, forcing him to hold his head high and walk carefully. Then, in a voice both solemn and slightly theatrical, the bailiff recites the official charge, disturbing the peace of the tavern, disrupting the harmony of neighbors, and spilling good ale. The last charge draws a few suppressed chuckles. Once the charge is read, Dirk must perform a ritual circuit around the tavern. He walks slowly between the tables, bowing deeply to each person he passes. The awkward size of the collar makes the bows comical, and the crowd relaxes, their laughter bubbling up like foam on fresh beer. Children peek in through the windows, giggling at the sight. At each table, Dirk must recite a short rhyme. Ale is for laughter, not for rage. May my foolishness end on this stage. It's a simple couplet, easy to remember, and it turns the punishment into a kind of performance. By speaking the words, Dirk both acknowledges his fault and entertains those he offended. A quirky detail adds to the humor. Tied to the front of the collar is a small wooden spoon. Each time Dirk bows, the spoon dangles precariously, threatening to clatter against the floor. If it falls, he must start his circuit over again from the beginning. This rule encourages precision and self-control, qualities he clearly lacked earlier in the evening. Halfway through the ritual, the fiddler resumes playing, his bow now steady and sure. The music shifts the mood from tense to festive, as if the punishment itself has restored balance to the room. Villagers clap in time with the tune, their earlier anger dissolving into shared amusement. Even Dirk begins to smile sheepishly, though whether from genuine repentance or relief at the lighter atmosphere, you can't say. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of such tavern punishments. Some view them as ingenious, preventing violence by redirecting energy into communal play. Others see them as trivializing serious conflicts. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. In a world without formal police or courts, rituals like this served as both justice and entertainment. When Dirk finally completes his circuit without dropping the spoon, the bailiff removes the collar and offers him a mug of water, not ale. Dirk drinks deeply, then bows one final time to the crowd. The tavern erupts in cheers, not for his earlier behavior, but for the successful completion of the ritual. It's as if the entire village has exhaled, releasing tension like steam from a boiling kettle. The bailiff gives a brief nod, signaling that order has been restored. Annalisa returns to her duties behind the bar, pouring fresh mugs of ale with practiced ease. Conversations resume, louder and livelier than before, but now with a layer of humor rather than hostility. The fiddler plays a spirited dance tune, and soon feet are tapping on the worn wooden floor. As you step outside into the cool night air, you glance back through the window. Dirk sits quietly at a corner table, sipping his water and laughing softly with friends. The giant wooden collar rests on its shelf once more, waiting patiently for the next outburst. The scene reminds you of something scholars often say about these rituals. They weren't just about punishing the guilty. They were about restoring the fabric of the community, stitch by careful stitch. Behind you, the tavern's warm glow fades into the darkness, replaced by the quiet rustle of reeds along the canal. Somewhere, a night bird calls, its cry echoing through the stillness. The village sleeps, its harmony preserved, at least until the next round of spilled ale and raised voices. The next morning dawns quietly, as if the whole village is holding its breath. The events at the tavern are already the talk of every breakfast table, but now the conversation shifts to something more serious. Beyond the punishments and public rituals lies a deeper debate, one that has simmered beneath the surface for generations. It is the age-old struggle between mercy and discipline, between forgiveness and the need to maintain order. You find yourself near the church, a small, sturdy building with walls of rough stone and a crooked steeple that leans ever so slightly like a weary old man. Its bell hangs silent in the early light, waiting to toll for the day's events. Inside, a group of village elders and church leaders gather to discuss last night's punishment and others like it. They sit on simple wooden benches arranged in a semicircle, their faces etched with lines of age and worry. The bailiff is there as well, standing respectfully near the back. Though he enforces the punishments, he does not decide their nature or frequency. That power belongs to the council. It's a blend of civic and spiritual authority. Today they will debate whether the village has been leaning too heavily on public shaming rituals, or if these ceremonies are essential to keeping the peace. The conversation begins slowly, like a river thawing after a long winter. An older man with a beard as white as snow speaks first, his voice soft but firm. "We have always believed that justice must be seen to be real," he says. "Without the eyes of the people, punishment loses its meaning." A younger council member counters quickly, his tone edged with frustration. "But at what cost? Are we teaching them to forgive or to laugh? Look at the tavern last night. Was Dirk humbled or merely entertained? Were we restoring harmony or staging a play?" The debate swirls back and forth, like wind buffeting the sails of a ship. Some argue that public punishments bind the village together through shared experience. Others fear that the rituals have become more spectacle than substance, their lessons drowned out by laughter and gossip. Historians still argue about this very dynamic centuries later, analyzing whether such ceremonies were truly about morality or simply crowd control. One elder brings up a particularly poignant case. It's years ago, a young woman accused of theft endured the ducking stool only to later be proven innocent. The memory lingers, like a scar. "Justice must have room for mistakes," he says, his voice trembling slightly. "If we do not temper discipline with mercy, we risk becoming crueler than the crimes we punish." The church's pastor, a tall, gaunt man with deep-set eyes, rises to speak. His tone is calm, almost hypnotic. "Punishment is a form of teaching," he says, "but teaching without compassion breeds resentment, not understanding. A village that only punishes will one day punish itself." The room falls silent at his words. You notice the bailiff shift uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He is a man caught between two worlds, the enforcer of the people's will and the witness to its consequences. His face reveals nothing, but you can almost hear his thoughts grinding like millstones. A quirky detail stands out as you observe the council chamber. On the wall hangs a tapestry depicting a large tree, its branches reaching outward, its roots tangled beneath the earth. Tiny figures are stitched among the branches, some standing tall, others bowing low. This tapestry serves as a metaphor for the community, a living organism, where every branch depends on the others. If one branch grows wild, it must be trimmed, but trimmed too much and the whole tree suffers. As the debate continues, voices grow louder, overlapping like waves crashing on the shore. The elders begin to list alternatives to public shaming. One suggests private mediation, where disputes could be resolved quietly without spectacle. Another proposes symbolic fines, such as offering extra labor on the dikes or cleaning the church steps. These ideas are met with nods from some and scowls from others. Tradition is a stubborn thing, and change never comes easily. You notice the villagers gathered outside, pressing their ears to the windows and whispering among themselves. For them, this debate is as important as any punishment. It determines not only what happens in the square tomorrow, but also how they understand their place in the world. Some seem hopeful, others anxious. A few children play at reenacting punishments in the dirt, their laughter a chilling reminder of how deeply these rituals shape young minds. Finally, the pastor raises his hand, calling for silence. "We are not just punishing crimes," he says slowly. "We are teaching future generations what it means to live together. If our punishments teach fear without love, then our children will inherit only fear." His words hang in the air like incense smoke, twisting and curling in the morning light. For a moment, even the birds outside seem to fall silent. Historians still debate the outcome of meetings like this. Some records suggest that councils occasionally reduced the severity of punishments after such discussions. Others hint that change was glacial, creeping forward at the pace of a weary ox pulling a heavy cart. Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. Moments of mercy nestled among centuries of ritual and retribution. As the meeting concludes, the elders file out, their expressions weary but thoughtful. The bailiff lingers for a moment, then steps into the sunlight with a sigh. His shadow stretches long across the square, intersecting with those of the villagers gathering nearby. You realize that he too bears the weight of every decision made here, every punishment carried out or withheld. Outside, the crowd disperses slowly, buzzing with speculation. Some are hopeful that mercy will prevail. Others fear that too much leniency will lead to chaos. The village hums with quiet tension like a lute string tuned too tightly. You walk away, pondering what you've witnessed. Justice here is not a fixed thing carved in stone. It is a living, breathing negotiation, shaped by the voices of those who dare to question it, and those who cling to tradition. In the distance, the church bell finally tolls, its deep sound echoing across the rooftops. It rings not just for discipline or forgiveness, but for the fragile balance between them. The days grow shorter as autumn tightens its grip on the village. The once bright green fields fade to a muted gold, and a cool wind sweeps through the narrow streets, carrying with it the smell of drying fish, wood smoke, and damp earth. As you wander through the familiar lanes, you begin to notice something subtle. The punishments you've been witnessing, so central to village life, are becoming less frequent. The square feels quieter now, its wooden structures standing like relics of another age. This shift isn't sudden. It's more like the slow turning of a tide, barely visible until one day you realize the water has receded. Historians still debate exactly when and why this transformation began, but many point to the growing influence of Enlightenment ideas filtering in from larger towns and cities. These new philosophies emphasize reason, individual rights, and a skepticism of tradition. And slowly, like ink seeping through parchment, they reach even this small, isolated community. The first sign of change comes from the younger generation. You overhear two young men by the canal discussing last week's punishment. One argues that public shaming is old-fashioned and unnecessary. Why must we humiliate a man in the square, he says, when we could simply fine him or make him repair what he's broken? His companion shrugs but doesn't disagree. That simple conversation feels revolutionary in a place where for centuries justice has been a public performance. Gradually, whispers of reform spread. A traveling merchant brings news of a neighboring village that has abolished the pillory entirely. A church elder receives a letter describing new laws being discussed in the city, laws that replace corporal and public punishment with more private, structured systems of justice. These ideas take root in the fertile soil of village gossip, growing alongside the very traditions they threaten to replace. The change is visible not only in words, but in physical signs. The wooden stocks near the square begin to show signs of neglect. Their hinges rust, their beams warp slightly from lack of use. The once vibrant pointed hats for the pillory are faded now, their colors dulled by time and weather. Even the ducking stool, once a spectacle that drew the entire village to the canal, sits unused for weeks at a time, its ropes fraying in the salt air. One evening, as you pass through the square, you notice the bailiff standing alone beside the whipping post. His hand rests on the smooth, worn wood, and his expression is strangely wistful. Perhaps he senses that his role is changing, that the rituals he has enforced for decades are slipping into memory. It is a quiet moment, but it speaks volumes. Historians still argue about whether this decline was driven by genuine moral progress or simply practical concerns. Some suggest that the village grew weary of the constant theater of punishment. Others point to external pressures, new trade opportunities, new taxes, new alliances, that made the old ways feel inconvenient and costly. A few even argue that Enlightenment ideals were more of a justification than a cause, providing a philosophical cover for changes driven by necessity. A quirky detail illustrates the gradual nature of this shift. In the tavern, where Dirk once paraded with the giant wooden mug collar, the collar now hangs high on a shelf as decoration. Children point at it and laugh, treating it as a curious relic rather than a tool of justice. Similarly, the oversized wooden shoes once used in public parades are now brought out only for festivals, worn by dancers rather than wrongdoers. The symbols remain, but their meanings have softened, transformed from instruments of shame to harmless entertainment. Not everyone welcomes these changes. Some of the older villagers grumble that the youth have grown soft, that without visible punishments, chaos will surely follow. If people no longer fear disgrace, one gray-haired fisherman mutters, they will do whatever they please. His friends nod solemnly, clinging to the belief that public rituals are the glue holding the community together. The council meetings reflect this tension. Debates grow heated as traditionalists clash with reformers. One evening, you slip into the back of the church hall and listen as voices rise like a storm. A reform-minded elder argues passionately for the end of the ducking stool. "We are not savages," she says. "Let us address conflict with words, not water." Her opponents scoff, insisting that without visible consequences, malicious tongues will run wild. The argument ends without resolution, but the very fact that such debates are happening at all signals how much has changed. Meanwhile, punishments continue, but less dramatically. Instead of a public parade, an offender might simply apologize in writing. Instead of fish guts and bells, a fine might be paid quietly. The rituals shrink, fading into the background like smoke, dissipating in the wind. You begin to notice how this shift affects the atmosphere of the village itself. There is less tension in the air, fewer crowds gathering in the square. Life feels more private, more contained. Yet something is lost in the transition. The stories that once bound the village together begin to fade. Without public punishments, there are fewer shared memories, fewer tales retold around hearth fires. Children grow up hearing only fragments of the old rhymes, half-forgotten verses about lazy millers and slippery fish. The collective narrative that once defined the community begins to unravel. One afternoon, you meet an elderly woman sitting by the canal. She tells you she remembers when the gossip bench was still in use. Her voice is tinged with nostalgia, though you sense she doesn't miss the cruelty. "We were all part of it then," she says softly. "Even if you weren't on the bench, you were still there, watching, learning. Now everything happens behind closed doors." Her words linger in your mind as you continue walking. By the time the first frost dusts the fields, the change is undeniable. The stalks remain empty, their wood gathering moss. The pillory leans slightly to one side like a forgotten scarecrow. The square itself feels strangely hollow, as if it has lost its center. The villagers move through their routines, fishing, weaving, tending the dikes. But without the old rituals, the rhythm feels different. Historians debate whether this loss of communal storytelling was a price worth paying for progress. Some argue that modern justice systems are fairer, less prone to mob cruelty. Others lament the disappearance of the shared ceremonies that once gave life shape and meaning. The truth, as always, is complicated. As you stand in the empty square, a gust of wind rattles the unused structures. carrying with it the faint scent of salt and wood smoke. The silence feels profound, almost sacred. You realize you are witnessing the twilight of an era. A slow, inevitable transformation from public spectacle to private accountability. And though the change is quieter than any punishment you've seen, it feels every bit as dramatic. The village moves forward, leaving its peculiar past behind like footprints in the sand, soon to be washed away by the tide of time. The first true snow of winter falls silently over the village, blanketing the rooftops and narrow lanes in a soft layer of white. The canals freeze along their edges, thin sheets of ice glimmering like glass beneath the pale morning sun. The square, once so alive with the noise of punishment and ritual, lies empty and still. The stocks, the pillory, the whipping post, all stand like quiet ghosts of their former importance, half buried in snow. Even the old ducking stool is gone, dismantled and stored away in a barn somewhere, its ropes and beams tucked neatly beside farm tools and fishing gear. As you walk through this hushed landscape, you feel as though you've stepped into a memory. The air is crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and salt from the frozen sea. The village is not dead, far from it. Children skate on the canals, their laughter ringing out like silver bells. And merchants bustle about, their cheeks red from the cold. Life goes on, but it has changed. The rituals that once defined it have faded into whispers and stories told by firelight. Near the edge of the square, you spot a group of villagers gathered around a small fire. They speak in low voices, sharing tales of the past. You pause to listen as an elderly man recounts the punishment of Klaus the fisherman, his hands gesturing dramatically to mimic the spilling of fish guts. The younger villagers laugh, not in cruelty, but in disbelief. To them, these tales are almost fairy stories, exaggerated relics of a harsher time. It strikes you how quickly memory transforms into myth. What was once a living, breathing act of justice now survives only as entertainment. Historians still argue about this process. Some see it as a natural evolution, proof of progress. Others warn that forgetting the past leaves communities vulnerable to repeating old mistakes. In this very square, where crowds once gathered to witness shame and reconciliation, now only faint echoes remain. The bailiff, now an older man with a slower step, passes by. His duties have shifted dramatically. Instead of enforcing public punishments, he now mediates disputes quietly behind closed doors, often over mugs of ale in the tavern. The giant wooden mug collar, once a tool of humiliation, now hangs above the hearth as decoration. Children laugh at its absurdity, never realizing the fear it once inspired. A quirky detail catches your eye. In the corner of the square, someone has placed a small wooden carving of a ducking stool, no bigger than a toy. It sits atop a stone pedestal, almost like a memorial. A simple inscription reads, "To remember that water cleanses, but words heal." The sentiment feels both wistful and hopeful, a reminder that justice itself evolves. As evening approaches, the villagers gather in the church for a winter festival. Candles glow warmly against the stone walls, and the air hums with soft singing. You watch as people who once might have been divided by punishment now stand side by side, their voices mingling in harmony. The community feels different now, less bound by fear and spectacle, more connected by quiet acts of trust. Outside, snow continues to fall, muffling the world in gentle silence. You stroll through the empty square one last time. In the fading light, you imagine the ghosts of the past. Peter standing in the stocks, bells jingling on Willem's sleeves, Greta sitting rigid on the gossip bench. These figures blur and fade like mist, leaving only the faint outlines of their stories behind. You realize that even though the punishments are gone, they've left an indelible mark on this place. The rituals may no longer be practiced, but the lessons they taught live on in subtler forms, in the way villagers speak carefully to one another, in the quiet respect they show during disputes, in the shared memory of a time when justice was loud and public. The square grows darker, the last rays of sunlight slipping behind the rooftops. You pause to take it all in. The stillness, the snow, the sense of continuity beneath the change. Justice here has transformed, but it has not vanished. It has simply grown quieter, like the muffled footsteps of children skating on frozen canals. You take a deep breath, savoring the cold, clean air. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls softly. Not for punishment, but for evening prayers. The sound is gentle, almost tender, a reminder that even in the harshest winters, there is warmth to be found. And as the night settles over the village, you know that the peculiar punishments of the past will never truly disappear. They will live on in stories, in symbols, and in the collective memory of those who once gathered here to watch, to judge, and to learn. The snow falls more softly now, each flake drifting lazily through the cold night air. The village lies quiet, its lights glowing faintly behind frosted windows. The square, blanketed in white, seems almost untouched, like a blank page, waiting for a new story to be written. You slow your steps, letting the silence wrap around you like a warm blanket. As you walk, you think of all the voices you've heard during your time here, the laughter, the cries, the murmured apologies. Though they faded, they still echo faintly in the corners of your mind, like distant songs carried on the wind. Each ritual, each peculiar punishment, was more than just a moment in time. It was part of a larger story, one that continues to ripple outward through generations. The snow crunches softly beneath your feet. In the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks open and shut. Life here is slower now, simpler, but that slowness feels comforting. It gives space for reflection, for forgiveness, for healing. You glance back at the square one last time. The old structures are gone, yet their outlines seem to shimmer faintly in your imagination. Perhaps that's how history works. Even when the physical remnants disappear, the stories remain, stitched into the fabric of a place like threads in a well-worn quilt. Your breathing slows, matching the gentle rhythm of falling snow. The night feels timeless, suspended between past and present. In this stillness, there are no judgments, no crowds, no rituals, only peace. As you close your eyes, you let go of the noise and spectacle of the past, holding on only to the lessons learned. The village fades into darkness, quiet and eternal. Sweet dreams.